How's it going, Andrew?
What's going on, Matt?
Not much, not much. I think for the point of posterity, we should probably let our listeners know how hurling season finished out.
Yeah, I kind of been avoiding talking about it, but we had for the listeners who were curious about how the end of my hurling season went in the semifinals a couple weeks ago, we had a fierce competitor, which is the mighty O'Malley's Boars. And O'Malley's is a food market that's down in somewhere in Milwaukee. I forget the exact address, but it's got some good foods, but they're a sponsor of that team. They're playing very, very well this year, and we put up a good fight, but ended up losing by a handful of points. So we got knocked out of the tournament.
Bummer.
But today, I'm going to be going and watching O'Malley's play versus Three Lions at the championship.
Oh, boy.
And, I'm a little sad that we lost, but O'Malley's was my team last year, and we got last place last year. So it's a bit of a rags to riches year for them. And as a newer sponsor, getting a championship run this early is pretty cool.
So would the inference be there now that you were off the team, they did better?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, but... But they had some good players this year. They had a nice offensive line and a pretty strong defense. They're pretty well-rounded. So they had a strong year, which is cool, and they'll be playing for the tourney. And then there's a fun game called Freshmen versus Sophomores.
Oh, boy.
So you get the brand new rooks versus the year two players, and then they face off. So it's like a David versus Goliath, but kind of still evenly ranked because, one team is just brand new and the other is just still pretty new. So then they face off in freshmen versus sophomores, and then we have the championship, and then we have the closing ceremony.
Fun.
Close the season. Yeah, it's fun.
That should be a good time. Let's get into this episode.
You know what else I'm doing? So they have a beer mile during halftime where we do 4 laps around the pitch, and after every lap you have to
drink
down a beer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll be throwing up today, too, so it'll be a good time.
Well, thanks for giving our listeners that visual.
Something to look forward to. Maybe I'll back out and be like, dude, I'm not trying to, but who knows? I feel like I should, so.
Well, you have fun doing that. I'm going to look at a house this afternoon. So.
Ooh, always fun.
Yeah, well, we'll see. The housing market's interesting right now.
Oh, yeah, I know. You're preaching to the choir on that one. Just be sitting in my garage again.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into this episode here so we can all both get around to what we have to do today.
Yep. Sounds good to me. So to our listeners today, we're going to talk about it being our 50th episode.
Woohoo, 50.
Loosen up your ties and roll up your sleeves. It's time for Fellowship with Matt and Andrew. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or any appended body.
Episode 50.
Episode 50. And for our listeners, I haven't drank a cup of coffee in a while, and I feel like Andrew's trying to get me all jacked up over here.
Isn't that good? I made you a nice cup, dude.
It's a good cup of Joe. I can feel the caffeine hitting already.
Dude, this is why I'm always on caffeine when I'm on the podcast, because this is why I talk so much and so quickly, because I'm just jacked up on coffee.
Early morning recording sesh with coffee.
Actually, for doing early morning recording, I gotta say, I feel like my mind's way more crisp. I feel like sometimes by 5 o'clock when we're usually, or 4 or 5, 3, 4, 5 when we're usually recording, sometimes I'm tired. Like I'm just like a little bit burnt out. We might have to consider doing morning recordings, just get it done early in the morning, and then when we're fresh, cup of coffee, have something for breakfast, and away we go.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I think that's, it's happy episode 50, by the way.
Episode 50.
Wasn't sure we were going to make it here. I think that's a good place to start. Things we've learned over doing 50 episodes now.
Yep. Today we wanted to talk about our podcast journey, getting meta, a podcast talking about doing a podcast because we're on episode 50. Yeah, I've had a lot of fun doing this podcast.
So have I. I think you touched on something. The first thing that we potentially learned is it's better to record in the morning.
Yep. I think it's nice, and our future goal to our listeners is, so up to this point, I'm sure you've seen our pictures on social media and some of the episode titles. We're sequestered away in our lodge rooms, trustee's office most of the time. And our future plan was to slowly move it into my house, which is 3 minutes from the lodge. So it's basically a lateral move as far as time to place, and have an actual studio set up so that we can not be fighting over the ability to use the building because we don't want to step on anyone's toes when we're trying to record. So today we were testing the first time. We're doing it in my garage. Technically, we want to build one in my basement, but the garage, when it's this nice out, I'm not upset about it.
Yeah, I'm not upset about it either. And, I also think part of it, doing it out here, we got both doors open and everything else, and a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of birds in the background, and I think that gives me a better atmosphere for my mind to really wrap around what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what the weather permits, we might keep recording out here and then in the winter move down to a basement when it's colder. So when you don't want to be outside,
you don't want to huddle up in here and like 17 layers of clothes,
two space heaters,
shivering, recording podcasts.
Creates like a very different type of content. Every episode's like 10 minutes. Where it's like, we gotta get done with this.
All right, we're just gonna get this over. No, I mean, it's been a fun adventure. I don't see it stopping anytime soon. The balls suddenly started rolling pretty good. It's kind of a slow burn at first, and Andrew will attest to the fact he's not really a numbers guy, and I am.
I like to abide by the if you build it, they will come mentality. So I don't really care about the metrics. I just say, hey, let's just focus on the content and have fun. I think when you're having fun, and you guys as listeners can maybe attest, when you're having fun, the podcast is more fun. So I try just to have fun, talk about stuff I want to talk about that I think is interesting, or Matt wants to talk about because he thinks is interesting. And then the big one, I just want to meet Masons to have on and talk to too.
Yeah. And I agree with that sentiment, but I'm also like looking at the numbers, and I have to say, going into episode 50 here at the beginning, I didn't know if we would be, at 2,500 downloads already, which we hit a number of episodes ago, and we seem to be approaching 5,000 pretty quickly here. It seems like it picked up a little bit, and I'm really happy with that. I think that our content is what's making us gain in popularity and our personalities, and I think we just got to keep the ball rolling, and but
yeah, we're currently at 3,169 downloads, which is fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a big thank you to all of our listeners as well for joining us on this journey. I've seen a handful of guys who have been with us since the start, which is awesome, and I'm happy you guys have put up with our tech upgrades and various things.
Yeah, I've been tempted to go back and listen to like our first couple episodes to hear the old microphones and everything else, but I'm also kind of scared too.
I've already done it. I know how it's like. But yeah, I mean, so like this podcast experience has been very interesting because it's introduced us to a unique subclass of Freemasons who do podcasting and Masonic content creation of sorts, making content for brothers and the public, which is, there's a decent number of them, but it's still a very small group that are doing it. And so that's been kind of cool. And I've really, really enjoyed about this podcast is grabbing brethren that I haven't had a chance to sit down and have a long conversation with, shoving a mic in their face,
right,
and doing it there,
and going, now you're stuck with me.
Yep, you can't even say you have to take a bathroom break. I'm not gonna let you out. You just gotta talk with me for a while. Yep.
Oh yeah, you're definitely the one that scares guests away. No, I'm just kidding.
They love it, dude. They love it.
No, we've had some amazing guests, and we look forward to having more amazing guests. I'm happy that we've been able to continue doing this and keep our consistency up. And, I think I said it earlier, but I don't see us stopping anytime soon.
No, we'll keep rolling until we get sick of it. And
or we get sick of each other, one of the two.
The other thing I've really enjoyed about doing this, too, is by always having to find something to talk about, it's forced me to look into various things that I've been interested in more closely so that we have a topic to talk about. And then also just the conversation itself has been enlightening, and I hope it's been enlightening for our listeners as well. The way I think is through talking. I'm not a good contemplator. A lot of my stuff is I think of on the fly when I'm in social settings. So when you're on a microphone and I'm talking through a topic, that's also kind of me working through the topic in my mind.
It's like a stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
I would agree with you there. And I think that compared to 49 episodes ago, I would say that my knowledge of Masonry and the way I view the world and the way I view Freemasonry's role in the world has grown and changed and evolved, and whether it be from talking through guests talking to guests or through certain ones of our topics, I just feel like it's really helped me grow as a Mason.
Same. And it's interesting. So we talk about a variety of topics. We've talked with a variety of guests just about their Masonic experience. And I've noticed there's like natural themes that just like flow through the consciousness stream that's coming out of our mouths. And it's like interesting because we weren't trying to like force a theme. The theme was naturally there.
Yep.
And I think that theme would be civility.
Yep.
And the importance of lodge culture and the importance of fellowship have been the big ones that I've noticed that no matter what you're talking about, whether it be the applications of the working tools or something like that, it somehow always flows back into these tools give you the ability to make yourself better, to make you more civil, to make yourself a better person in a group, and a lot of that's reinforced by its culture and things like that. So I've noticed that like these themes are like kind of, I think some of these underpinnings within the craft that are important to a healthy lodge. And it seems that always tends to come out of our conversations, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think it's important for our listeners to understand that we came into this with no grandiose plans. We came into this as two guys with a name for the show and some microphones with no clue what direction it was going to go in. I mean, we had a rough idea where we were hoping to take it, but we didn't really have, any concrete plans on what we were going to be doing or how this was going to look. And then it just kind of found its direction on its own. And it's been fun to watch the evolution of the podcast and its content itself. It's also been fun to watch our evolution as podcasters,
as broasts,
right?
As I type in the title.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is like I do think that when we came into this, we came with like our own set of like light bylaws, where we're like the goal of the show, if we do it, is to, and I said this on the Third Degree podcast, I've said this probably in the past, was to capture the conversational aspect of two brothers out at a pub, one. So as to like our conversations, share those conversations with guests that are local, not like big authors, not like big types that you would think you run a podcast, just with brothers that we like and know, or interesting people in Wisconsin and to a lesser extent around the country if we can. But the main focus on highlighting Wisconsin Freemasons and then sharing the good news that happens in Wisconsin and promoting events were always kind of our framework that we worked within.
Yep.
And I think that framework has been slightly adjusted, but still kind of holds true to that kind of that basic structure we went in on.
I would agree, and we've done a few like quirky things, like, adding in like Matt Travels, where I'm,
Yep.
taking equipment with me and recording wherever I happen to go in my many travels and stuff like that. And, we've worked through it when, our scheduling didn't work out and just one of us had to do the podcast, which, and it's fun to have a guest broast on from time to time, and we've just, I don't know, I feel like my interviewing skills have gotten better since we started this. I feel like my speaking skills have gotten better, and I feel like I'm not afraid of pauses anymore when my brain needs to catch up with my mouth.
That's because I'm going to edit them out.
Right.
I delete them on the back end. I diligently delete the pauses.
Well, and that's helpful though, and like when you give me the count from an episode, it's helpful for me to understand where I need to improve and eliminate that word and just live with the pause instead of trying to fill the dead air.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a classic public speaking tool is counting your ums so that you go, how did we today? So that you know that it's better to pause than to do which now I'm at to tell my AI not to cut these because they're for a purpose, but you know what I mean? So it's helpful because, it makes you a better speaker. And also I've noticed my comfort level speaking on a microphone has gone up.
Oh, yeah.
When I was at Irish Fest last weekend, I would announce the bands. So I'd come out on the mic and, welcome, what's going on? Are you guys excited? Blah, blah, blah. And like pump them up and then thank the sponsors and then introduce the band. Like, we got a special act coming out. Give it up for Bob. And I remember 2 years ago when I did that, my hands would be shaking when I went up there to the mic.
Oh, yeah.
Now I just like walked up, adjusted the mic to height, gave a thumbs up to the sound guy and was like, I've talked on mics so much now. I don't even
Right.
care. I'm just going to yell at these people and get them pumped.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I used to have issues with a microphone being in my face, and it's less now. It especially doesn't bother me in the podcast setting.
What's funny, too, is when we bring on guests, I can see the old me in them where they're like, they're enjoying it, but they're at the same time like, oh, this microphone, like, I get a little nervous, and I'm just sitting there being like, we just talk about anything we want at this point, because it's like, yeah, but I get it. It takes time to get comfortable, because you do feel like everything you say is being, I guess, scrutinized, because it's all on recording, you know what I mean? So you're like,
Right.
if you're not careful, you start to overthink what you want to say, when honestly, I just drop F-bombs sometimes and just kind of go with what comes out my mouth, make weird analogies, and just see what happens.
Thankfully, only once. But, the stream of consciousness, though, and thought, I think, is something that keeps this show fresh, because we're working through the ideas with our listeners. We don't have it totally formulated ourselves, so they get to go on the ride with us to get to the conclusion and see the connections.
Yep, and for our listeners, like, honestly, like, when we were talking with other podcasts, they're like, so what are your big plans? How do you prep for episodes? And we're like, do you think we have plans? And you're like,
Or prep. We prep news and events. That's about it. And we know what topic we're going to talk about. And maybe one or both of us will have done a little, very light research on it. But for the most part, we go, this is what we're going to talk about. And then we talk about it.
yeah, oftentimes at most on a topic, I'll put together like 5 or 6 just header points that are like just talking points. So if I get lost in what we're talking about, I can bring it back to something. But we really have very little prep. It's
Yeah,
just like,
we don't do much in the way of prep. We don't even really prep for our interviews. We just
Nah.
we allow the conversation to take whatever direction seems most natural. We have an idea of what questions we want to ask, but we don't really force them. If they don't come up, we don't,
I have basically a sneaky list of about 20 questions I could ask Freemasons, and the only time I pull from them is if the conversation is stalling, right? Like, if it feels like it's like hitting a lull, then I'll toss another question. But I really try to make sure our interviews are not really interviews, they're just fellowship. That's kind of the goal of, like, instead of like always being like, oh, the guest is just going to talk. Then when I hear from the guest, I go, no, we're just all hanging out now. So we're going to all just have natural conversation. It's not about putting our guests into the hot seat and say, we're just going to rapid fire questions. It's like, I just want to get the questions to get the conversation started so we can just start hanging out.
Yeah, and then we'll just follow it to wherever it takes us. And
Whatever windy rabbit holes
Yep.
we want to go down.
Yep. And that's been a lot of fun too, because we've got to experience fellowship with brothers that maybe we wouldn't have, or in a different setting than we would have, where it's maybe a little more introspective sometimes.
Or maybe not as long. Like, you can sit down and have a 10-minute chat, but now you're stuck for like 20 or 30 minutes with us.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And we're going through it, but I gotta stop saying so much. I just noticed that.
I say too a lot.
I gotta stop that.
Oh, out here in Wisconsin,
You gotta put the
Oh,
stereotypical Wisconsin accent.
Oh, yeah,
on it
no.
there. Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah.
Are we gonna get some cheese curds at the fish fry?
Oh, that'd be good.
I forgot where I was. I think honestly, that's what also makes us so much fun is we goof around sometimes.
We're not, that's the thing is, we've always said we're the professionally unprofessional Masonic podcast. And we try to keep it on the level, and we try to keep our topics pretty, squared away. But we also don't want to restrict ourselves to sound like robots. So we still want to have fun, but also keep the reputation of the fraternity also in mind too. So we try to keep things pretty G-rated. We try to still have fun, but be guys at fellowship, but within a certain level of decorum that Masons should always keep, especially when sharing their views with the public.
Agreed. And this may shock our listeners because you're probably all sitting there going, well, you guys are at episode 50 now. What's the plan moving forward? There isn't one.
We don't have plans, man. The plan is just to keep kind of doing what works, upgrade a studio, try to get a space set up, and it's some cool guests that we haven't been able to talk to.
Yeah, definitely want to get some more guests on. Obviously, that's part of the plan. And, we've figured out the capabilities to do phone interviews and stuff like that now, so that we can start branching out and reaching out. I think one of the interesting things that's building in the Masonic podcast community that would be fun to kind of tap into and take advantage, and we've already started doing that with the Third Degree, is it seems like there's a lot more willingness to do like collaborations and interview other podcasts and stuff like that. So I know that other Masonic podcast is currently on their summer break, but when they come back, I think we're going to be doing something with them, and we're going to have the guys from the Third Degree on. And I think that's something you can start, if you are a follower of Masonic podcasts, I think that's something you can start seeing more of, is collaboration between the podcasts to help us all reach new audiences and just to get to know each other, because we are almost a community within a community.
Yep. And the thing is like, if you look at other podcasts outside of Masonry, like even comedy podcasts, those guys jump on each other's shows constantly because it's mutually beneficial and it's just fun to get, like, how we were saying that sometimes guests are nervous on mics. That's a normal thing. It's not unusual. If you're a guest who was nervous on the mic, that is how you should feel, because you don't do this all the time. But it can be fun to get other podcasters on with you, because then you have everybody who is kind of used to doing this. And so it can create some unique conversations because people are more comfortable, because they're like, I don't care, there's a mic in my face, whatever.
Right. Yep. I don't know. I'm excited. to see how this continues to grow and evolve over the next 50 episodes.
So what would you say your biggest lesson learned is from doing this podcast for 50 episodes?
50 episodes. My biggest lesson learned. Ooh, that is a good question. My biggest lesson learned, and I know I said I was a numbers guy, I was a lot more intense about it in the beginning. Less intense about it now, and I think that's been good for me. I get more excited about it versus going, why are our numbers so low? And I think relaxing about it and kind of taking a little bit of a backseat to it, instead of constantly like logging in like 7 times a day to check the numbers.
Oh, we had one more listen.
Right. Yeah. is a good thing. I think the scoreboard will count itself, or however you always put it, is philosophy I'm trying to incorporate a little bit more.
In comparison to the Death of Joy, like just
Thief of Joy.
Thief of Joy. Yeah, whatever. But just, I think it's more fun to remember that we did this not to get famous, but to have fun and do meaningful conversations. So, like, if you keep that in mind, and you'd be like, it's not really about how many people you reach. I'm just happy that we've had a couple of emails from people saying, like, this podcast was really helpful and it really had a nice impact. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that our mouth sounds could do that. But
right.
You know what I mean?
No, and that feedback's been great. If there's one thing I would like to see more of, would be fan engagement or listener engagement. I would like to start, seeing some more emails or comments on Facebook posts and being able to engage with the people that are enjoying the show.
Yeah, I mean,
or not enjoying the show for that matter.
Feedback is good no matter what. But I mean, that's the thing too, is it's nice when you get fan engagement too, because when we're trying to figure out if we want guests, if we see people that are really interested in the show, we might be interested in them too and say, I'd like to hear this guy's perspective. I know he's a brother. Let's get him on,
Right.
So it's like, it's important, because if we're going to prioritize bringing someone on, I'd rather bring a fan on and say, sweet, this guy likes what we talk about. He probably would be good at talking about it than if he likes these types of conversations.
Exactly.
And stuff like that. I think my biggest lesson learned.
I was just going to bring it back to that and ask you, so perfect.
Is one, not to say like I just did 3 times, but my other biggest lesson learned is, like, I get overzealous wanting to talk because I'm one of those types, has been learning to share my opinion when it's important, but also leaving air time for other people to provide their opinions, and sitting back and just saying, like, I've said my point, let's let other people have their points now, because otherwise I can go on tangents. So,
well, there's that, and you've gotten, I think, better containing your point. Sometimes your points can get long-winded.
Yeah.
And I think you've started to consolidate them a little bit, where you're not going on for 2 minutes trying to explain the thing that you explained in the first 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's like getting better at talking on the fly too. being able to find your point faster in that consciousness stream we were talking about, whereas sometimes like it's like any activity. The more you do it, the better your brain gets at getting to what it's trying to do. So it's been helpful doing it this way because it's been able to force that into like, I know what I want to say quicker, and then delivering in a way that can be helpful for the listeners.
Right, exactly. And, I think that's something we've both learned. And now that we're talking about it, since we are on episode 50, I'm probably going to go back and listen to some of our old ones. But I feel like that's something that at the beginning we both did was we would both go on for a long... It wasn't so much a conversation as it was one of us would ramble on for a few minutes, and then the other person would ramble on for a few minutes, and then go back to the other person. And now it's more a give and take and a back and forth.
Well, it's like when you start doing something like this, it becomes, at first, it feels like you're having a conversation with the listeners and the microphone, right?
Yeah.
But as you go, since the goal is to be conversational, it turns into a conversation with one another with small points where we might be like, oh, and for the listeners, this is happening. This is why we say it. Like, you know what I mean? Remembering that we are putting this out for listeners, but that we're not directing the content directly at the listeners. We're directing at each other for the benefit of the listeners to benefit from the conversation.
Right. And we've challenged ourselves as time has gone on with this podcast in that, I wouldn't have been comfortable at the beginning having to do an interview by myself, and now I just went on a trip and interviewed like a bunch of people by myself, and I branched out and we've handled multiple guests at one time, which is interesting. I think what the most we've had on is me and 4 other people, so it's been interesting to try to put ourselves in those situations and see how we do in them.
Yep. And here's my next question. What's the weirdest byproduct you've had of this podcast?
The weirdest byproduct.
Yeah, what's something weird that you weren't expecting?
I was never expecting somebody to either A, recognize me because of the podcast, or B, refer to me as that podcast guy.
I think my weirdest one is having conversations with brethren out fellowship and talking about something Masonic, and they were like, "I already heard about this on your podcast." You like, it's like the same thought process. He's like, "This sounds like a podcast episode I listened to where you talked about culture," and I was like, "Oh God!" Now they have like you assume that there's like a brand new thing, but you kind of like through the podcast have like kind of made your opinion on it. So when you share it, they're like, "Yeah, I already heard that opinion on your pod," and you're like, "Oh, okay, sorry."
Well, and I think part of that comes from the fact that we just don't believe that anybody actually listens to our podcast, so we assume they haven't heard it. Our egos are definitely on the back seat for this. I really see the numbers, and I don't believe that people are actually listening.
Well, and then there's that weird moment where you're like talking with a brother for a while, and then they're like, "Oh, and FYI, I like your podcast, by the way," and you're like, "Oh, did you secretly come to talk to me because you knew you listened, or was this per chance?" But you like, I don't know who listens, so you're like, "Oh, thanks, man, that's awesome."
Yeah, I have no clue who listens, and so it's always nice to get those compliments when we're just talking to somebody, or somebody wants to approach us and tell us that they enjoy it and find it helpful.
The funny thing is, though, when you meet a brother you've never met, but they listen to the pod, you suddenly have the realization they know a lot more about you than you know about them, and you're like, "Oh God, they're like 10 steps ahead of you."
Well, that's one of the things of putting yourself out in the public, and that is always awkward when you think about it. Like, oh, I've had a 5-minute conversation with you, and it seems like you know everything about. Oh,
yeah. You've had 6 hours of conversations from me. Yep. Yeah, that's always an interesting one. It's like when I listen to other podcasts, I'll be laughing like, "Yeah, me too. Just me hanging out with my friends on this podcast."
right.
Yep.
And, I'm a podcast junkie, and I always have. I was before we started recording this, so I felt like I knew what I liked about podcasts and didn't like about podcasts, and I couldn't really quantify it, but I knew the general direction I wanted us to stay away from, and that was an air of negativity on the podcast. I hated listening to Masonic podcasts, and they don't really exist anymore, the ones I'm referring to, where they were like negative about the craft the whole time. I was like, that's not really the right way to present it. We need to be positive, especially in the face of the public. Yeah, every organization has its problems and things you need to figure out, but that's not, you don't want to sit there and be negative about it, and like you're not going to make people want to even find out what your organization's about.
But it's like kind of like you can be negative about anything. You can be negative at work, all this stuff. But the thing is the key difference is we have criticized parts of the craft, but in a positive way where you're saying this is what we need to see more of.
Right.
Because just complaining is just complaining. You're like, no, offer solutions, right? And so I think we've always tried to where we found there were areas that we were unhappy with, instead of just being like, God, this is stupid, I can't believe they do this, saying, here's something that I've noticed, but I think if people start to focus on this, they will see vast improvements, is saying, yeah, nothing's ever perfect. We're groups of people. We're flawed humans trying to do live up to a larger organization and a larger ideal. So there are going to be shortcomings, but just like people, you can change and you can improve, and if you are ambitious enough, you can make the necessary changes to make improvements and live up to that idea.
Right. Well, and I think there's different ways to approach it. Like the one I'm thinking about would always be like, nobody wants to sit in a boring business meeting and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So instead of talking about it being a boring business meeting and how nobody wants to join just to go sit in a boring business meeting, how about instead of complaining about that for 5 episodes, you talk about how you can make your business meetings not boring and give them value.
And you can then take that to your lodge and experiment with it, report back to your listeners and say, hey, we decided to condense our meetings to be more efficient, to make more time for more interesting stuff. We added a fellowship aspect that makes a little benefit. And business is necessary, but we need to add value outside of just the necessary business. You know, there's like everything can be fixed if you just have the willingness to try and to think outside the box and try to think, what would you like to see in these meetings? If you go, I don't want to go to them at all, well, that's not practical. You have to get business done to run a lot, but you can make the meetings more interesting. And there's no point going on a 5-episode spree just boo-hooing about it, right?
Right.
Get down to work. We're craftsmen, right? We're here to work. We're here to, we're here to chip on some stones.
Give us solutions instead of just complaints, And I think, and solutions aren't cookie cutter. And we don't have all the answers, and neither does anybody else, but we can start having that conversation.
And we can start trying things and see, what works and what doesn't. And, we've said many times on this podcast, a failure is just an opportunity to learn.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's like, I think that there's an important aspect that when you are doing Masonic content creation, that you don't sit here just airing dirty laundry, getting mad at one another, and because it's like, okay, if you're in a relationship, right, and all you do is tell your friends when you have fights, but you never talk about the good sides, they're going to assume that your girlfriend or wife is horrible, but it's not a fair representation because you're just focusing on the negative things that happen instead of focusing on the positive. And I think it's not very helpful or fun to listen to people just boo-hoo. It's more fun to think, how could I make things better? And how can I work better? And what do I already enjoy?
Right. I would agree. And, I'm guessing that partially as part of the reason to do with why that podcast isn't around anymore. And, nobody wants to... If we just sat here and complained about everything all the time, nobody would listen. Nobody already listens, so it would be even less. It would be like negative listens.
They would take their listens away.
Right. We'd have like -5 subscribers instead of.
Like, how did they do that?
Wait a minute, how's our numbers going down? This doesn't make any sense. We're at -1,000 downloads.
People pulled downloads away from the nether. No, but yeah, I think it's fun. I think that I've enjoyed too looking at the positive sides of Masonry because it's really awed me with some of the aspects of the craft too. Like there is a lot of very special things about being a Freemason that you should take a lot of pride in. And sometimes by focusing on those positives, you start to notice them all over the place too and being like, wow, this is cool. This is unique. This is something that I'm happy to be a part of. And, that can also add to augmenting your Masonic experience. Because, your perspective creates your experience. So if you have a negative perspective, you're going to have a negative experience. But if you can find the positive, which it's sitting there always right in front of you, there's plenty of positive things, you're just going to have more fun.
Right, exactly. And, that's all we're trying to do at the end of the day. That's why we don't have any grand plans. We're not looking on trying to put any, programs together or anything like that. We're having fun. And we're just going to keep the ball rolling and see where it takes us.
Yeah, the moment this becomes work, I'm going to quit. We have to keep it fun.
Right.
Yep.
It's gotta still be fun. Although the one thing I will promise to our listeners is should this show ever end, we won't leave you guys in the lurch. We will we'll do a final going away episode because I'm so tired of listening to podcasts that cease to exist, and that's all they do is just all of a sudden it's done. Like there's no like final follow up or like farewell or anything. It's just they stop putting out episodes, and that drives me bonkers. Like, give me closure. Give me closure.
I think, I plan on, at the moment we start losing our consistency, if that ever happens, that's when you gotta start thinking, goodbye. But I mean, that it'll happen occasionally, but like when it becomes consistent, you just, end it on your own
consistent,
terms.
Inconsistent,
consistently inconsistent.
Yep.
End it on your own terms, right? And like you started it on your own terms, end it on your own terms. But, we don't need to focus on that because right now I have no plans on ending it anytime soon.
Nope, neither do I. And
that's just a thing, yeah.
If anything in the future, maybe if we get a little busy, maybe it goes to an every other week or something, So there's options for the road we're going to take, but we're just going to roll with however it goes and see where it takes us.
Yep. But once again, I'd like to really give a huge shout out to all our listeners.
Oh, yes.
You guys have made this so fun. It's so cool to be able to share masonry and share fellowship with so many brethren around the country, around Wisconsin, and around the world to a certain extent, too. We couldn't do this without you guys. We would be talking to ourselves, which we do plenty. It's been awesome. It's been a fun journey. We're really thankful to have you guys listening and tuning in with us.
Definitely a huge shout out to our listeners. We really do appreciate all of you. And, in the name of collaboration here on episode 50, I would like to shout out a couple other Masonic podcasts that if you're into Freemasonry podcasts, some good listens out there are That Other Masonic Podcast, the Third Degree Masonic Podcast, Studio 357 Masonic Podcast, and, of course, the unfortunately Bears fans boys down in Chicago at Refreshment. They've put out episodes from time to time still, but you can go back and listen to their old ones. They're always entertaining.
Yep, and those podcasts in specific have been super cool, very supportive. They're on our social medias, and we're on there supporting each other. They're nice guys. They do great content. It's nice to get different perspectives from different states to see how Masons are all very similar and all unique in their own ways, which is super cool. I do my rounds on those podcasts pretty frequently, and it's always a good time just to listen to brothers talk about brother stuff.
Well, and I think part of the fun thing about these more like state like focused podcasts versus like a national like just generic education podcast is you get to enjoy a slice of masonry from that place. And maybe you hear about things they're doing there that you're like, ooh, hey, maybe we can try that here. Maybe we can try that there. And you get this piece of masonry, and it makes you feel more connected to the craft as a whole and brings you kind of outside of your little bubble of your grand jurisdiction.
Yep, and I mean, there's a great place for the education-based podcast, too. Not that we're uneducational, but we're a little more loosey-goosey. The education podcast, like Further Light, is one that I love from our state. They do really, really good education, but, there's a place for each. You want to have some time where you're just learning about the craft, and you want some time where you're just learning about brothers. You know what I mean? Right. One is the theoretical, one's the living, and I think that they're two sides of the same coin.
Yep.
And there's a lot of benefit to listening to both, but there's a vibe you're looking for when you're listening to one or another. Some days you might be like, you know what, I'm really feeling like some deep dive education. Other days you're driving to work and you're just like, dude, I just want to listen to some guys just chit-chatting and having a laugh and talking about things that I'm passionate about too.
Agreed. And I wasn't in any way disparaging the education podcast. I was just saying that there's a different vibe from like Whence Came You, which is guys not talking about local stuff. They're talking more esoterics and stuff.
They're reading papers and doing good education stuff.
Right.
Yep.
That's a different vibe, and it has its place, and I enjoy those as well. I just, these fun little local ones give you different perspective.
Yeah, you get to hang out.
Right. And you
virtually kind of with brothers.
Yeah, you get to know each other and, hear about struggles and similarities and differences between jurisdictions, which is really fun.
Yeah, sounds good. But yeah, I think, that's a good episode stop there. Just, we wanted to give you guys, we've been doing a lot of topics and interviews and stuff, but for our 50th episode, we thought we should just talk about our journey to episode 50. And we're excited that we made it this far, and we look forward to
The next 50.
The next 50.
Ooh,
Episode 100,
ooh.
we're going to do champagne.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do something
Or
special
sparkling apple
for
juice.
episode
Wink, wink,
100.
wink, wink.
So if you want to reach out, make sure to email us at timeforfellowship@gmail.com or on any of our socials, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, X. Reach out to us any one of those places. We will get back to you. And, give us a like and a follow and a share on any of those social media platforms. Make sure you're getting the word out. If you're enjoying our content, which we hope you are, make sure you get the word out there so other people can find it.
Awesome. But thank you so much to our listeners for joining us on these 50 episodes, and we look forward to 50 more with you. And thank you so much for joining us at Fellowship.
Thank you.